and welcome to our first Membership Matters of 2022. I'm Louise Moulton, Director of Education at the ISTD, and your host today is Valentina Grecci. And before I welcome our guest speaker, I'd just like to let you know that closed captioning is available for the session. So if you click on live transcript at the bottom of the Zoom bar and you select show subtitle, you'll be able to access this. If you're on a mobile or on the app, these subtitles may automatically appear without the option to turn them off. But please be aware that these are auto-generated captions, so may not be 100% accurate due to the live nature of the session. So today we're delighted to welcome Jessica Allen to discuss trans and non-binary inclusion within dance. Jessica trained vocationally at Arts Educational School and went on to perform professionally for major ballet companies and musicals across the world in soloist and principal positions, including English National Ballet Company and the Cats musical, to name but a few. And in 2013, Jessica began her transition and noticed quickly how few transgender stories are told in the theatre industry, let alone told competently. Jessica has supported the ISTD journey for inclusion as an active contributor to our think tanks and also written for our magazine. And Jess now dedicates her time to educating theatre companies and schools about the needs of transgender performers. And she's the first person in history to have openly worked as a professional dancer in a classical style at both extremes of the gender binary. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Jess so that we can begin today's session. Thank you, Jessica. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Louise. That's a lovely intro. Yes, hello, my name's Jess. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Thank you to everyone at the ICD for giving me this opportunity and opening the floor for me to have a little chat with you all. I think there's quite a lot of you, which is brilliant. I'm so excited to see a nice big group. Amazing. So yes, thank you. That's a little bit about me. Yes, I trained at Arts Ed. I had a great, lovely, fun career. Sadly, I did get injured and my career began to wind down. And this was the point where I decided to transition. It was something I knew that I needed to do for a very, very long time. Actually knew that I was different since I was about 5 years old. So decided to make that choice. We're going to have a little look back at a few reasons why I didn't do that earlier as we talk. So yeah, you know, you're thinking, okay, yeah, broken down ballerina, it's a vibe, right? Yeah, so then I began my transition in 2013, you know, because I like to live my life on hard mode, apparently. Yes, I also trained as a teacher with the RED in 2016. We're also going to talk a little bit more about that coming up. I was, yeah, quickly seeing that the industry wasn't, I was basically trying to reintegrate myself into this industry that wasn't made for somebody like me. I was noticing that, you know, no matter how hard I tried to squeeze in, there were many barriers. And this led to a sense of frustration. And yeah, just I couldn't work out what was going on. And it's taken me a lot of time and help, thanks to people like Drew McConey and Goldsmiths Uni, and obviously the ICD too, who have helped me kind of arrive at a place where I'm able to realize what the problems are and given me a platform to be able to address them with lovely groups of people like you, to try and make a difference in this industry, which is so reflective of society in general. So yes, wonderful. I'm going to just give a little introductory spiel of my own, just to kind of talk about what I want to cover today. So this is just a little thing that I've written. As a major global governing body, the ISTD and all within it have a responsibility. We are ambassadors for the dance and wider theatre industries. We set the tone and climate within dance education and work. It is beyond time to discuss how to better include transgender and non-binary dancers and broaden the horizons for all dancers present and future, including cis dancers. As an intro to trans and non-binary inclusion, I aim to foster entry-level thinking about the core components of the conversation around trans performers, our history, our significance in the modern day, I wish to share my lived experience concerning the treatment of trans and non-binary individuals in our society and how that climate naturally influences the theatre world. I hope to arm you with a baseline knowledge and intrigue and awareness, enough to begin challenging a kind of status quo, so that the ISTD and all of you can more effectively fight some of the world's most marginalized individuals. So without further ado, I'm going to crack on with my first thing. So that's some cliff notes about me and about my goals. And I'm going to start with a bit of relevant life experience now. I find that today that is my most valuable asset in my work. It all comes back to life experience as a trans person. The reason for this, I think, is because it's in my travels, in my time, I find that it's not a conversation that people are used to having. It's not a concept, although it's actually quite a simple concept. It's one that people don't encounter very often. So to make it kind of real for people, I use my life experience to paint a picture of trans life. And I will just put a little content warning here. Some of the things I'm going to be talking about will be very candid, not particularly pleasant instances. It won't be anything extremely heavy, just a little content warning about that. Yes, so it's very important to remember that I hid my gender identity, my true gender identity, and my kind of feelings of dissatisfaction with my gender, the role as it was in life, underneath a very painstaking, like bespoke, crafted, artisanal, created character, you know, like this suit of armor, if you like. And it's a very macho nature in ballet dancers, men in ballet. And the training that goes along with that really feeds that. It's a kind of like hyper competitiveness, lots of bravura, and it kind of perfectly fed into this very well crafted exterior that I put on to make sure that nobody ever suspected that, oh, there might be some gender feels going on underneath. I made sure that it was the case that nobody would ever find out, like at any cost. But like any illusion, there are kind of chinks in the armor, little cracks. And I found that every time a little bit of the armor came away and the true person underneath began to come out, I was met with punishment in some form. And that took many, many different forms. You know, there's the obvious ones like physical violence, verbal abuse, but there's also kind of like psychological trauma, and things like that that come along with it. Institutional issues are what feed this kind of thing. I'm going to address that in just a moment. So yeah, I'm going to splice a few little vignettes from my life in to kind of make it real for you, the kind of things that trans people might experience generally, but also specifically in a theatre context and in a theatre training context. So yes, trigger warning for transphobia, I guess. Yeah, so when I auditioned for Arts Ed Train, I remember very clearly, you know, we pulled up the drive with my mum in a little pea green Micra to this grand, beautiful mansion. If you've ever seen it, you know, it's a lovely 15th century mansion that's been kind of built around, gorgeous building. And me and my mum look like little hobbit people with teeny tiny kind of up we go, up the drive in a pea green Micra, love it. And we pull up to this mansion front for the audition day. And I remember stepping out of this pea green Micra and I look up at the building and I go, right, I have an opportunity here, but unfortunately I have to make a choice. So I made a choice between, do I train and get my dream to be a professional dancer at the highest level, or do I transition? Now, like I said, I knew that I was female, I knew that I was a girl right from when I was 5 years old. And I knew at 11 that I had to make a choice. Now, why was that? Because I'd already at that point been part of systems designed to punish trans identities, looking at things like comedy, where the man in the dress trope is a very common thing that we use, especially in Great Britain. If you look at the history of comedy and comedy in film and TV, the man in the dress trope is a very prevalent one. So systemically, we've got this like background noise going on in trans people's heads that teach them that it's wrong. Right from the word go, it teaches us that being trans is something to be embarrassed about. Being trans is something dirty, bad, and a joke. And I didn't want to be a joke. Like, I didn't want people laughing at me. I want people laughing with me. Like, I'm a bit of a class clown. I'm up for a bit of a laugh, but I don't want people laughing at me. And as we know as adults, when you can laugh at somebody and devalue them, you can do anything to them. You're capable of anything. And we see that in media a lot. Trans woman murdered, trans woman beaten, trans woman, you know? So at 11 years old, to have to make that choice and to have that knowledge is very telling about the society that we live in, especially lived in then, which was about 2004. So yes, just a little like bit of context like for what was going on in my brain at the time. So yes, I had to make this choice, and unfortunately I said to myself, I can't have both. I'm going to have to go for this dream. So I sacrificed living authentically. Yes, so then I got into Tring, wonderful. And then I was living there as a boarder, and there were times when the armor would fall away, or I'd be hanging out with the girls in my year and they'd be like, oh my God, dead name, you're so macho and so butch. Wouldn't it be so funny if we gave you a makeover? Oh yeah, okay. So I'd get a makeover. Oh no, please don't, that'd be horrible. Yeah, okay. And I get like a full makeover from the girls. And then I'd be seen by a member of staff, usually a pastoral member of staff, who would pull me aside. And I remember it very clearly. One said, this is disgusting. If you do this as a role model for other students will think it's okay to do this too. It's a very odd and specific type of language used. They'll think that it's okay to do this too, as if it was something to be ashamed of, something that was bad and it would like infect others. So I'm having these feelings that we talked about before reinforced in the back of my mind. Oh, right, I'm a disease. Like the feelings that I have are a disease. And this led on to further action. You know, the more times the armor would fall off and I'd do something feminine, I'd like paint my nails or something, even if it was just like a little clear color. They knew already to look for it in me and they would punish it. And I found that I would be drawn up, if you don't know, when you go to somewhere like Tring, you have to sign a kind of contract of conduct, a bit like when you start any job or company work. And in that, these kinds of contracts, this one was no exception. You might often find a clause that says, do not do anything to bring the school into disrepute. This is a very common thing that comes in lots of contracts. I was sat in a room and with a lot of senior members of staff, for professionalism and just for ease, I won't name them obviously. They sat me down in a room and they got my contract out, a scan of my contract that I had signed, and they pointed me to this particular clause, disrepute. And they said that if I continued to do this, I was bringing my school and my cohort into disrepute. Again, reinforcing the idea that as a trans person, I am socially unacceptable. It's a level of legal punishment now. It's gone to an elevated level. I'm about 13 at this point, and we've now elevated, not just, oh, don't do that because other people might do it too. We've come to a point of, don't do that, you're in breach of contract. I am now contractually an outlaw as a trans person, like, as far as the school, and it's happened to me since with companies and jobs, that I am now contractually bad in a lot of ways. So it's ramping up, you know, the bolder that these people are getting with their transphobia, the levels are ramping up. So yes, contracts, a ballet company is exactly the same. I'm sure that if you are under contract, any of you at your workplace, I would imagine if you poured through it, you would find a similar clause. And then it got medical. So I was in class one day, I think, if I remember rightly, I was just taking ballet class with Terry Wright, and I finished the class and I got pulled out, and it was a pastoral member of staff, and they said, right, Jess, well, not then, dead name, you come and see the doctor. And we were all assigned a doctor in-house who would come in and like see to us. And I'm like, okay, must just be a regular weighing or something, which is quite common, weighing and measuring. And I go into the door and I go into the stand where the doctor is, and I sit down on a chair, and the door poof, slams behind me. And from behind the door become about 4 sisters, like 4 nurses, members of staff, and a doctor, and then 2 members of staff behind this doctor. I am now flanked by a metric F-ton of staff. Some of them have been outwardly transphobic to me. And I would just say, I didn't have this language, the language that I'm talking to you now with, you know, transphobia, you know, microaggressions, I'll be chucking out lots of words. I didn't have any of that. So all I knew that I was different, and I was being taught that I was a freak. And they sit down and they tell me that, you know, you need to stop doing this, because otherwise we're going to have to take like medical action, and you're going to end up in therapy. And what they suggested was conversion therapy, essentially. What was being talked about. It never came to anything, I will just say, but they spoke in language that I now realize they were talking about conversion therapy. You know, talk your way out of these feelings, essentially. You know, I don't think they realized what they were saying. I don't think there was any fault or threat, but what they essentially suggested for me was conversion therapy. Because I was too talented to go to waste, right? And it all came back to how I could help the school by being an ambassador, and being trans, you can't be an ambassador for anything. And yet again, reinforcing the idea that I was a freak, bad, contractually awful, legally bad. So that's why I didn't transition until I was like 20 something. And then I'd already transitioned, and I'm like, cool, I can't dance anymore. Firstly, I'm injured, but also there's no space for trans dancers. I'm going to go and train as a teacher with the RAD. So I got on their PDTD course, for those of you who don't know, Professional Dancer Teaching Diploma, which is like an intensive course for ex-pro dancers. And this is where I encountered microaggressions heavily for the first time. They would come up to me sometimes and be like, don't forget, Jess, that we had a long conversation about you, if you would be allowed to use the changing room. Out of nowhere. I would be walking down the hall, going to my next class, or maybe I had a placement teaching some people. A member of staff would come out. Don't forget, Jess, we had a long conversation about if you should be allowed in the changing room. I've been out for maybe 3 years by then. And I did 3 years like full-time, no medical care. So I was like on hormones for maybe like 2 months by that point. So not very far along in my medical journey. Just a total unprovoked microaggression right there. Don't forget, don't forget you're different to everyone else. Don't forget that you don't quite belong. And then they'd say things like, oh, I'd teach some kids, get some feedback, and they'd sit down. I wouldn't get any feedback about my teaching. All I'd get was, Jess, and I quote, you have a big personality. And This is a comfortable euphemism for you assert yourself too much for someone I'd prefer to be quiet. Just let that sink in. Like, when that's the meaning of the thing, that people who are training you to be a teacher in this industry, teaching you to perpetuate a craft, to pass on your knowledge, when they teach you not to assert yourself, it's crushing. And it's akin to, not the same as, but it's akin to the angry black woman stereotype that is perpetuated a lot in the West, especially. And it's a horrific microaggression that appears for people of color all the time. And it's a similar train of thought. So obviously never to compare transphobia and racism, never do that. But they're similar styles of microaggression. Trans people aren't allowed to assert themselves because I prefer you to be quiet. Yes, so that's a kind of depressing little segment of what I wanted to talk about. However, I thought it was necessary to make it real for you, just what it looks like to be trans in the world and in this industry. And those are just a few palatable examples for this particular talk. So what's the issue? Like, why are there so few of us within every level of the craft? Beyond the social acceptability thing that we sort of covered, what's the reason that we have such a systemic issue, especially in this industry? It comes down to a number of talking points, but there's two really big ones. And they're the two that I observed in my article for Dance magazine. I'm just going to read a little excerpt from it, just to kind of, if you haven't read it or you don't know what I'm on about, just so you can understand what I'm on about. So yeah, two big ones. Pushback against trans people in dance often comes in two distinct flavors: the topics of tradition and physicality. The idea that trans people didn't exist in the past, so they can't be part of any narrative set in the past, as well as the argument that trans people's bodies don't adhere to the standards that the dance world has deemed aesthetically pleasing. It's clear that dance has its roots firmly in tradition. When we think of the origins of classical ballet, for example, we tend to imagine French aristocrats sculpting the art form from 16th century Italian dance styles. But why do we stop our history lesson there? As long as there have been humans, there's been dancing. But transgender people are a new and trendy thing, right? In ancient cultures, transgender identities have always been present. In 2018, archaeologists discovered 3,000-year-old remains from Iron Age Persia. Further studies showed that what these remains were of what we now call transgender people. A whopping 20% of the graves discovered there contained somebody whose gender identity was outside the rigid binary gender system we cling to in the West today. Transgender people have not only been present throughout history, but fluid gender roles and expressions are shown here to be incredibly common. That's 20%, that's 1 in 5 of those people who were dug up. The latter argument is also troubling. It illustrates the gatekeeping that a lot of dancers and dance educators seem to genuinely and sadly be proud of. The idea that something needs to be exclusive and elite in order to be respected is misguided and has a vivid history of racism, ableism, and body shaming. At the most fundamental level, dance is storytelling. The entire medium revolves around communicating emotions or information with an audience. These are things that don't require banana feet, 0% body fat, or least of all, what genitals you have. Not every dance has to be ideally built to be an incredible artist. So we have tradition and we have body standards. And while I don't have anything particular to kind of add to those today, that's just kind of to outline the two big talking points for you. The full article goes a bit more into it, and I encourage you to read it if you haven't. And obviously the discourse on body standards is vast, especially with how it affects women and femmes. If you need to know the ins and outs of how this affects theatre, just read any discussion or feminist theory about, you know, feminine body standards especially, but, you know, male beauty standards too, male body standards are just as susceptible. And you will get the understanding of that point too. It's just kind of turned up to 11 in dance because dance is a visual art. I bet you've heard that before. You know, oh, dance is a visual art, so therefore no fat people. It comes back to the social acceptability thing. Who do we value most in society? Who gets to do the elite thing? Is it the trans people? No. Is it people of color? No. Is it fat people? No. Because they're valued less in society. So those two things are inextricably, is that the right word? Inherently linked. Yes, so there's also like a sense of incredulity that I feel about innovation as well. Like, remember I talked about tradition a minute ago? There's been a huge upsurge lately during the pandemic, a time of massive innovation for our industry. I'm sitting talking to you right now on a Zoom call, something that we didn't do before, you know, en masse, at least before the pandemic. And it's interesting, isn't it, that now tradition matters a little less because of words like innovation. The mega rich white guys, for example, who own all the theatres in the West End, their innovation is celebrated. Oh, Andrew Lloyd Webber did a thing on the online. Wow, what an innovator! What a pioneer! They're pioneers. They're helping this industry evolve. They're visionaries. But when I, for example, call out a giant casting agency, this is a true story, if you hadn't guessed. If I call out a giant casting agency for clumsy transphobic casting calls, I'm an upstart. I'm unprofessional because I attempt to innovate while being trans. That's my crime. I'm a trans person who dares to talk. Remember when we spoke earlier about you have a big personality? It's the same thing. It's a perpetual cycle of what we call a microaggression. It's something that is so common that it's invisible. You don't see it as out of the ordinary. That's why it's invisible to you. A bit like how racism often operates, or ableism. It's so common that these things become invisible, and people say them or suggest or allude to transphobia, racism, ableism without even thinking about it. And that's what a microaggression is. They're just like little things that are so common in our society that you don't even notice that you do them. Have you ever spoken to a trans person and said, for example, welcome to womanhood? That's a huge microaggression. If you ever say that to a trans person, have a look in the mirror, I would say. I would like to say something stronger to you, but have a look in the mirror. That is an example of a great microaggression. Anyway, getting off topic. Yes, I'm unprofessional if I innovate, or if I call somebody out, or if I begin to think that trans people deserve to have a voice in the things that we're talking about, especially when the stories are about trans people. Yeah, when I talk about erasing gender identity like shackles from the way that we dance and dance dynamics, when I remove those two things, I am erasing the history of the craft. And a disclaimer on that, I absolutely want both of these things to exist. My entire mantra is to open additional doors. You know, you don't need to erase classical ballet to let trans people do classical ballet. Like, I'm not saying that a trans dancer couldn't be a principal of the Royal Ballet. That's very easily. In fact, look to Russia. They've got, actually, weirdly, you might think, they actually have 2 trans dancers training in some of their most prestigious academies. I think one's at Perm, and I think one is at Kiev. Fact check me on that one. And anyway, so the point is that trans bodies are capable to do those things. But also some trans bodies aren't capable of doing those things, which is fine. So we just open additional doors. doesn't take away from anything. You just open some additional doors. And that's the kind of key to my entire education system, the way I teach schools, the way I teach and consult with the ISTD, as well as about opening additional doors for trans people. We're going to talk about that in a minute. And it comes down to apathy. People who that aren't necessarily malicious, aren't necessarily like, I hate trans people, but they also don't say, I support trans people. They go, I'm not particularly transphobic, so this doesn't affect me. I don't actually care. I've got my own stuff going on, thanks. And they put it out of sight, out of mind. And apathy is a big like barrier to all people who fight for social justice, all people who fight for anti-racism, anti-transphobia, you know, better disability accessibility and stuff like that. And it often comes down to apathy. The big core group of people who could be supporters, I'm white, I've got all my privilege, I'm cis, I'm a guy, I don't care, I'm just going to be over here having a beer. Like, they don't care really, because it's not been made real to them, like I'm making it real to you today. My entire talk today is essentially a cure to apathy. And that's why I tend to be so candid and talk to you like you're sitting across from me and we're just having a chat, because I need to make it real to you. There are a lot of people in here, and if every one of you goes away with the energy that I have, or at least half of the energy that I have, you can talk to others with that energy, and you've removed apathy from the equation. You are no longer an apathetic person. You become an ally. When you remove your apathy, you become an ally. Yeah, so how do we change it? What do we do? What do we change it to? Why do you care? So firstly, we just involve transgender people. You have them in every single room where decisions are being made, especially when it's about trans stories. You don't, and it probably seems very simple and very obvious, but you'd be amazed how many times that people say, oh, I'm going to tell a trans story, and not have a single trans person involved. If you're a fan of the BBC, if you like the BBC, they do this all the time. They are one of our biggest barriers, the BBC, because they love to have a trans debate with no trans people involved. And they're all about impartiality, but except when it comes to trans stuff, because they'll invite anti-trans campaigners, but no trans people will be involved. So you involve people, you put them in your shows, you have them in your schools, you have us in wigs, makeup, crew, doesn't matter. Just make a space for trans people to be in this industry and pay them to be involved in your work. Because we cannot be what we cannot see. We cannot imagine a world where trans people could be involved in theatre. And it's been the same since 2004, at least, because I had to make that decision, remember? You cannot be what you cannot see. Make sure that you give trans people something to see. So in your school, if you've got a position open, or even if you don't have a position open, make a position for somebody trans who might be good for the role. This is about over-representing, it'll probably feel, because you can't, it's kind of equality versus equity, right? You can't just give everybody the same opportunities when somebody's already down here with no visibility, no help, no social structures, because then they just go like this and they get left behind. But if you have what may feel like an over-representation of trans people, you can bridge that gap. You make those spaces. The structures are broken. Don't try and cram a trans person into an industry like that. You have to change it, grow it, make spaces specifically. We're already so reluctant to try and take up those spaces in this business. You need to help us to do so. You need to invite trans people to talk. You need to invite people to educate your faculty. You need to, etc., 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 ad infinitum. You need to keep that training going. You need to keep visibility up. The next thing you do is you alter the language that you use. Like I mentioned before, you free the dynamics of dancing from gender roles, which are, of course, very arbitrary. Like, why can't a male dancer dance Sugar Plum? This is such a very opaque example, but why can't a male dancer dance a Sugar Plum? There is absolutely no reason except for, say it with me, social acceptability. And they're incredibly arbitrary. They're based on outdated rules. And like I said, both things can exist, right? Your traditional royal, Bolshoi, EMB, whatever, they can still exist with your more modern ballets with trans people involved. I just did a piece for the Colchester Fringe for the first time, came out of retirement to dance, and did a piece called Inked, which was all about a trans person dating a cis man and their relationship, what that looks like. And that had never been told before. I was the first person to do it. And like, I'm not a particularly talented dancer right now because I've been out of the game for a long time. I'm broken. I'm in a brand new body. And yet I was the only person available to step up and do it. But this is what CTC Dance Company did. They made a space. And then history was made. So you just make a space. You change the language that you're using. You unshackle silly, arbitrary gender constructs from the dynamics of gender. The dynamics of dance. It doesn't need to be male equals explosive and female equals lyrical. Like, those are silly, arbitrary connections. Yes, like I touched on before, nothing trans-related to be spearheaded by cis people, period. It should be trans-led. If it's going to be a trans story, if you're going to involve trans people in a heavy way, trans-led. Remember, that's very important, because as soon as cis people begin telling our stories for us, then we're just doing what we've always done. And look at that, look where that's got us. It's been a more deadly year for trans people than ever last year. Yes, we champion positivity and love. We let queer people have happy endings. We let trans people in their stories have nice, happy endings on the things that they are involved in. We break the mold. We stop, oh, the sad trans sex worker meets the brave hero in the film and she dies tragically before he can tell her that she loved, right? No more sad endings for trans people. I've had enough sad endings, thank you. I'm ready for some happy ones. And if you champion that positivity and that love, and this isn't to say forget that transphobia exists. You need to juggle two. You need to remember that transphobia exists and do it in spite of that. You need to be like, I hate transphobia so much. I hate the way that these people suffer, and I'm going to give them some goddamn happy endings for a change. And you write them and you let them have their happy ending by having a job, having a home. These are all things that trans people face. I've been homeless. I was living on the streets of London because I was denied housing because I was trans. Yeah, it's crazy, the things that we take for granted. And like, I'm a white woman. If I was a trans person of color, that's a whole other ball game. So give people happy endings with the work that you create and the jobs and spaces that you create. Yes, a real roller coaster there. But this affects cis people, you know, all these things aid cis people too, because the minute that you begin diversifying our education and this industry, the more well-rounded artists that we see, instead of having people, you know, on the tracks that we have them, which are segregated to male and female, we begin diversifying our dancers' education and they become well-rounded artists with like a really deep understanding of the craft. Like, I know it's quite fashionable for lots of male dancers to do point work, for example, for strength. But why just for strength? Why can it not be part of the art form that they learn about? Why it's a piece of the history. It's a piece of, yes, it's good for the body, I guess. But also it's making people add strings to their bow. Dances are changing all the time now. Remember we spoke about innovation before. And why would you not want your dancers to come out of their training, or they come out of a company, go to the next job, and they can pick so much more. They can walk into a room and be like, right, this modern ballet requires me to do so, so, and so. And they can do it. Now they can't, because the training is so one-tracked. Like, yeah, you can be diverse in the amount of genres that you do, but you don't understand the full craft. So I don't understand why we don't want our dancers to have a full education, you know. And I'm not just somebody who doesn't know how it works. Like, I understand that physical limitations are a thing. What I am saying is that there is a certain degree of choice in training that people should be given, the ways that they kind of pick the kind of training that works for them. And it also gives you a really great sense of what kind of artist you are. If you know everything, almost everything, let's say a dancer with a crazy knowledge knows absolutely every part of the craft, you know, oh, they're amazing with point work, they can Fosse, they can do this, blah, blah, blah. Alvin Ailey, they can do it all. And they go, right, I now have access to all of this knowledge. What works for me? What makes me happy? What makes me a fulfilled artist? What makes me shine out? No more should people be, oh, yeah, I went to ballet school, so I guess I'll do ballet. No more of that. We're making well-rounded, diversely trained dancers, and it gives such a broader perspective on the craft, and ultimately makes for happier dancers and a more interesting industry. People don't want to go and see Swan Lake for the 50th time. People are clamoring for new things, different ways. We're always innovating. That's how we are as human beings. We innovate, we reach for more, we overreach all the time. But that's because we're so ambitious as people, as a species, and we want to grow and evolve. So let our industry grow and evolve too, with the times, with the information we now have. We're operating on 1600s info in ballet. Like, it's mad. And it's time. It's beyond time. Thank you. Thanks for listening. I feel like I should open the floor up for maybe some questions. Got about 15 minutes. If there are any good questions. Let's have a look. Now's the time.
Okay. We have got, there is one, it's quite a long question. Shall I read that out, Jessica? And then
yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. Okay, so somebody here is, as an LGBT plus member myself, I've spearheaded our gender neutral school policy, which has completely changed and enhanced the well-being of our students. Our language has changed to include everyone and ensure everyone feels valued. There are no gender barriers in my ballet classes. As you said at the start, we are ambassadors and have a duty to students to lead by example and listen to them. I created a gender neutral ballet solo as part of a research project funded by the CDD, which enabled students to have a greater sense of agency and creative freedom within the ballet module. And then he sort of goes on to say, so it's really positive stories coming out there. And just asking, maybe you'd be open to come and speak at our school, and you'd be very welcome by staff and students alike. So it's great to hear some positive things there, isn't there? coming
Absolutely.
through.
Oh, that's from Paul Clark. Absolutely,
Yeah.
Paul. I would be delighted. And you really hit the nail on the head there with the word agency. It's giving dancers the agency over the way that they express themselves, be perceived, and kind of tailor making their own training. Absolutely, agency is the perfect little agency. That's the one. Choice. Yeah, absolutely. You definitely hit the nail on the head. Individualism, I know, has always been like a big thing at Rambert. So absolutely, I'm glad that that's being championed through your work. So thank you so much.
That's great. It's great to hear those stories. Are there any other questions coming through?
Don't be afraid.
There are some in the Q&A, Louise.
Okay. Someone said that was brilliant. Can you send us a link to the Dance Magazine article? I believe that's on our website. So I don't know whether Valentina, you can put a link to that if you're able to. Thank you for that. The question here, do you think it would be any different if you were starting your training at Tring today?
Yeah, I think it would be different. They have just started up a initiative, actually, which I've only just been made privy to. In the last, I think they said in the last 5 years they started it, but it's only got its kind of go ahead. It's only had its kind of go ahead in the last month, and I've been invited to talk with them, but I think it would be different. I think they are still in their infancy, and I think a lot of schools are. I'm sure that anyone at the ISTD would hold their hands up and say that the ISTD, before talking to me, was definitely also still in its infancy about these kinds of things. So I think it would be different, but I'm going to give it one caveat. I think that the student body would be very good about it. I think that the staff would have more issues because we are products of this system as professionals in teaching or dancing, usually both. And we have our own hang-ups. Like I have my own internalized things that I do sometimes when I teach, and I'm like, God, why did I do that? Because that was not conducive to anything good. That was just me pigeonholing a student into a certain role. So even I'm culprit because I still have to shake off the internalized transphobia that I feel. And that's a big part of being an ally, is recognizing that you do have things that you do are transphobic. Even a trans person does. So it would be different, but I think there's still a lot of work to do.
Thank you. And just some sort of, have you got any sort of signposting? If a teacher has got a student that wants to perhaps ask questions about their transition in dance, but you know, specifically related to sort of dance, is there anything that now that you know that you could signpost them to, Jessica, at all?
I mean, I think just the best way to go about these things is just continuing training, continuing your awareness and deepening your own understanding with some active research, reaching out to charities such as Gender Intelligence, and getting yourself trained by them is also a really good thing that I can signpost you to do. Hiring consultants and educators is the way to go now, because it kind of ticks two of those boxes. It makes sure that trans people are being paid for educating you. There's this whole thing that trans people are constantly bombarded with, can you just tell me about this? Can you tell me about this? What about transition? Blah, 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 blah. And it's like, I do not have the energy, plus you don't pay my rent. So please pay me. So there's that. And also you are getting, like I said, not taking the information from cis people, you're getting it from the horse's mouth, literally. Yes, keep educating yourself, do active research, talk to lots of trans people and pay them for their time.
Great. And there's Jessica, there are quite a few people reaching out from vocational colleges and schools. I'm wondering if they reach out to you, whether you can come and speak more at their schools to the young people.
Absolutely. I will put how best to do this. Reach out to me directly, or do you want to go through, think it would be better just to go through like the ISTD if they're ISTD members?
Yeah, we're happy to, yeah, I can pass pass on to some people there. That's great.
Pass my email on.
Will do.
Email me, talk to me, and we'll see what we can do. Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Just letting you know that I've got 10 minutes left.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a few questions coming through. It's quite difficult sort of which one to answer first, so we can't answer them all. It's about how do we as teachers continue to teach technique adequately whilst allowing teens to cover up when they perhaps feel embarrassed to show their bodies. Maybe they're going through some of these things. Yeah, I think it's just really somebody sort of saying, how do we make our dancers feel comfortable? Is it more about just getting them to wear what they feel comfortable in?
Yeah, this is about uniforms, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think so. I think a uniform is a good thing and a bad thing. I think, yeah, comfortability most. Like, it's only training. It's not, they're not going on for donkey tomorrow. Relax. Like, it's okay for them to wear what makes them comfortable. You're not going to get a good learner if they're like constantly like, oh, I don't want to do this pirouette because it shows my thighs, or, you know, oh, I feel like when I do this, my hair does a weird thing and that gives me gender dysphoria, maybe if they're a trans person. Like, it's okay for them to not follow the rules, if you like. Remember when I spoke about social acceptability, about how there's a kind of like, what's the word, like a code of conduct for how we behave as professionals and as learners. And I think, yes, we are in the pursuit of discipline, but we're also in the pursuit of dancers. So if you don't want to put people off, you've got to make them comfortable. It's uncomfortable enough as it is dancing. Like, it hurts enough as it is. Like, you don't need to give them emotional trauma at the same time by insisting that they feel just uncomfortable. And also, you're going to lose people. They're just going to be like, this isn't for me. I cannot fit in here. So you need to make that space by allowing people to be comfortable, is my advice.
Yeah, I think there's another sort of, you know, what are the key things from sort of your experience that are important to support those students that are transitioning? You know, what can we do to do more as dance teachers, apart from obviously uniform is one thing? Is it movement wise anything that, you know, what can we do?
Just being really upfront, giving your learners choice from the get-go. I think Paul touched on it in the question, how there were no like gender roles attached to the things that dancers can do and choose to do. I think just right from the beginning, you will notice from even very young students that they will gravitate to the thing that makes them most comfortable. And this comes back to also being comfortable in the studio. They'll gravitate to things. So if you say, right, we've got this dance that is like this, and you give them a bunch of adjectives to describe something, and then you give another one, it's like this, and this. You get to choose one of them. Which one would you like to choose today? And you let them go at it and explore. Like, the goal, I don't think, this might be a controversial opinion, I don't think in the studio we're in the pursuit of, the idea is to, even no matter where the level that you start at, the idea, even if it's an impossible goal, is to dance like a principal by the end, right? That's not the idea. The idea is to grow in time and explore. This is why we have grades, right? Remember, the whole reason why we grade things and why we have levels like that is so people can sort of grow. And I think the exploration of those things is more important for them to fail as well. Like, you go, oh, that didn't work for me and it didn't make me feel comfy. Now they know. You've just taught them a really valuable lesson about a dance dynamic or a way of expression that makes them feel good or bad. And I think that is a good tool for helping people grow as artists, not just mechanical robots.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are a few questions about, you know, when bodies are transitioning and what the sort of limitations in movement are for, you know, for that body. And what I would just like to say is that we have a dance science event July the 31st with IADAMS and CIDI and the ISTD, and we're going to be talking about the world that we live in today and the bodies, and we're going to be looking at the dance science underneath when we're training these different bodies in front of us. So that will be a really good one to put in the calendar for July the 31st. And also there's a comment here about, you know, the ISTD at the moment. You know, we've talked about sort of male and female exercises, boys music, girls music. We know that these are areas that we need to develop and that we are developing and we're having conversations about. So
lots of good work happening there about that. So
yeah, absolutely. So you know, we are aware that we need to open doors and make a space.
it's a process.
Yes, absolutely. And so I think we'll be getting on with that. I think for the moment, there's some personal questions, but we'll try and get some answers back to you from those personal questions via Jess, if we may, Jess, if that's okay, some of those things that are coming through there. But I would just like to say thank you so much, Jessica. It's been really insightful. And thank you for such an honest conversation and for us to really see the side, you know, the other side in terms of sort of, you know, the transgender perspective. And I think the two things I'm going to take away are about, you know, like you said, make a space and open additional doors. I think that's what we can all take away. And for those of you that want to learn more, we have got a course coming up with gendered intelligence called Trans Awareness, the Basics, and that's on Monday the 9th of May. And the places are limited, so don't delay about booking that. I know May seems a while away, but it's coming up very soon. So if you'd like to book a place on that course, if we get a waiting list, we'll repeat it. So we're going to start doing some more work with gendered intelligence. So I think Valentina is going to pop that into the chat for those of you that want to do a direct link and book while it's completely on your mind. So Jessica, thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the platform to be able to talk and be as honest as I have been today with you. Yeah, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone for your questions, and lots of thank yous coming through, Jess, and lots of people wanting to get in touch with you too.
Yeah, don't hesitate to get my email and message me, and I will try my best to get back to you as quick as I can.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Jess. We'll close our webinar today. Thank you.
Thanks.